Sweet soul, thank you for joining me today for an episode of the High and Anxious podcast. And I am so excited about what I've got in store for you today. So typically my episodes are short and sweet, actionable solo episodes, but in this episode, I had the pleasure and privilege of interviewing my teacher, coach, mentor, friend, and just gem of a human being, Kim Garnett. Kim is the founder of Brainy Girl. She's a technology and digital marketing specialist. She typically works with course creators, helping them to get visible, grow their audience, grow their courses online. That's how I met her, but we've worked together in other capacities and I've gotten to know her more since, and she is just so incredible. So today, Kim and I discuss in this episode a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of anxious high achievers, and that is imposter syndrome. I know that it's something that you are familiar with, unfortunately, but join me today in this important conversation and listen to what Kim has to say about overcoming imposter syndrome. And you guys, her story is just nearly unbelievable. From single parent with a baby, no job, wallet stolen, to powerhouse entrepreneur, business owner, and just all around incredible human being. I want to give you a little bit of a heads up that typically my episodes are clean, but this one does have a little bit of language in it. So if you've got little ones around, maybe find another time to listen to it without them. Put in earbuds, usher them out of the room, because there's just a little bit of language in this, which isn't typical. So fair warning, maybe skip ahead, come back to this, but please do give it a listen because this conversation, you guys, chills and goosebumps throughout the conversation and afterwards, since Kim is just an incredible human being and she has a story and a message and a vibe that you just are not going to want to miss. I can't wait to introduce you to her and give you a seat at the table with us as we have this really incredible discussion about imposter syndrome. So, sweet soul, I can't wait. I can't wait. Please join us. Hey, are you a high achiever who struggles with perfectionism? Do you get stuck in the cycle of overthinking? Do you do everything for everyone else because you think otherwise it won't get done? Do you feel like you should come with a disclaimer? Hi, I'm anxious. Hey, I'm Katie. Full disclosure, I'm not a therapist, doctor, or mental health professional. I'm just a career mama who also struggles with anxiety. For me, anxiety reared its head at the most inconvenient times, when I wanted to be present with my family, at those high-pressure business meetings, when I was laying in bed awake at night worrying instead of sleeping. I just wanted to relax and be able to have fun, and I know that you do too. What if you found tools to manage your anxiety? What if you knew how to enjoy life even though you are anxious? Look, it's time to put down that third cup of coffee and swap it for some lemon water. We're going to get control over anxiety so it can stop controlling you. Let's go, girl. So, Kim Garnett, aka Brainy Girl Kim, thank you for joining me on the High and Anxious podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me, Katie. I'm really excited to be here.
I don't even know how to describe you because I have worked with you as a client, but you have been a coach to me and absolutely more than that. You've been a mentor, a kind friend, and I'm so grateful for all the work that I've gotten to do with you, and I'm grateful that you're
Bless your
here.
heart. Thank you. I'm grateful I'm here too. And I'm grateful to have met you.
Same. Same. So do you want to introduce yourself to the audience a little bit?
Sure. So my name is Kim Garnett. I am from Victoria, BC, far west coast of Canada. I own a company called Brainy Girl. I have been running it for about 23 years. And the first part of it was as a specialized virtual assistant with tech and marketing. And the second half of the company, probably for the last 10, 11 years now, has been specifically working with course creators, mostly novice course creators who want to take their knowledge from their head or from their book and turn it into an online course and use it as a way to reach more people, leave a legacy, or make more revenue.
It's amazing. And that was kind of the capacity that I ended up working with you in. And as I've gotten to know you, I see you have just had such a diverse and deep experience in life beyond simply the work that you described, which I think might be relevant to the topic today. So I wonder if you'd be willing to share a little bit about, like, personally and professionally, what other things you might have done that have kind of led to this recognition of having imposter syndrome and needing to work through it. Um, almost, I suppose
Yeah.
it's almost like a lifelong adventure type of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you could call it that. Some people might call my life difficult, my history. Um, I feel like there were so many lessons that I had to learn. And so I had to go through everything that I went through in order to get here. So I moved out really, really young. Went to school full time, worked full time, put myself through college for early childhood education, actually, because it was my first love. And I thought, if nothing else, what a great parenting course to pull apart your story and put it back together that way. And so it was great for that. But then I realized that I couldn't save the world on $15 an hour. So I did a whole host of things, from bartending, serving, shooter girl, worked at a call center, worked as a lead skip tracer at Equifax. I made clothes. I had a sewing business, so I made clothes for amputees and those with mobility issues. Um, I did belly masks, like pregnancy belly masks, plaster masks of pregnant women, which was huge in the 90s. Everyone wanted one. So I did a lot of things leading up to about 2001. And so my life is chopped into before Dante and after Dante. Dante is my son, and he was born in 2001. So that was all sort of before Dante. Um, so he was born, and I was left to raise him on my own. And I did not want to send him to daycare. No judgment, just for me. It was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be home to raise him. But I was in this bit of a pickle where I didn't have a job and didn't want to go out to work. So I basically gave myself 3 weeks to be able to figure out whether I was going to be able to make money from home, which was kind of unheard of in 2000. Like, that was 23 years ago. People weren't really doing things from home. But I had this dream that I wanted to work from home and raise my son. And so I hopped in my shitty minivan with my son, and we went down to the public library, and I went in and I got a book called Website for Dummies. And when we went back to the van, someone had broken into it and taken my wallet. So then I had literally no money. Like, if that wasn't a
My
universal sign, I
gosh.
don't know what was. Like, you have to do something now. And so I went home crying all the way and thinking, this is insane. I have a baby and I have no job, and what am I doing? Um, and so within 3 weeks, I had taught myself how to build a website. I had built the largest Canada childcare directory in Canada. It still is the largest childcare directory in Canada. It's the most amateur thing you've ever seen in your whole life, but it dominates the search engines. And so I figured out then, okay, I get this online thing. I know how to do this. So in 2002, I actually sold that, and I started a virtual assistant business helping businesses get online with having some kind of online representation, a website generally, and then helping them do their marketing. So getting their website out into the World Wide Web. That was 2002. It became very successful. Fast forward to 2014, and I've had a lot of people approach me and say, how did you build a successful business? Can you teach us? And so I somehow happened upon Thinkific, which is the platform that I eventually used to build a membership for virtual assistants to help them learn how to create successful businesses. And it turns out they're on the west coast of Canada, where I am. So I hopped on a ferry and went over, and I think at that point they had maybe 25 employees, like very, very small. They have hundreds of employees now. Anyways, I had a discussion with them, and they mentioned that there were customers of theirs who needed some help with Thinkific. And so I said, sure, I'll help them out. And 2015, 1 year later, that was all I was doing, was just helping Thinkific customers get their courses online and into the hands of their buyers. And that's what I've been doing till now. So 9, 10 years now.
Wow. I knew some pieces of that, but certainly not all of it. You have been through it. I can't even imagine coming from being a single parent, having your wallet taken literally, like, no job, no money, to
Nothing.
where you are. That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. It was quite an experience.
Wow. So, given the different things that you've tried and experienced, you've often been in a position where you're new to or inexperienced at something, which you described some of. How
Mhm.
has imposter syndrome shown up for you throughout these experiences?
Okay. So I'll give you some specific examples where it sort of reared its ugly head. And these are, probably two or three examples, but there's a lot more. I mean, I've dealt with this my whole life, like I think a lot of women have. So when I started my membership in 2014, there was some really big gurus in the online course industry. And all I would see was their ads, right? Their Facebook ads. Join us now. And there would be hundreds of comments. And I mean, I felt so insanely inferior to any of these people who are doing this at this point, because this was pretty early in the game. And so constantly worrying that my content wasn't expert enough, even though I'd been running this business and had built it from absolutely not, literally no money, no nothing, no anything, to a pretty darn successful business while raising my kid. But I still didn't think like I was expert enough. And internally, I think I felt like a fraud, right? Like I didn't really know. So that was one specific example. And that was a really tough one because you have to overcome that fear in order to get to the other side and still do this. And I'm sure we'll get to that in this discussion. But even at this point, I still prefer to call myself a specialist, not an expert, because for me, expert, the connotation of expert means I know everything. And I don't think anyone ever gets to a point where they do know everything or should know everything. So I prefer to call myself a specialist still. And maybe that's a little still bit of imposter syndrome, but I have no need to be called an expert. I know my value and my worth now, and it does not matter to me what other people label me in that regard. Here's another example, 2015, when I was kind of pivoting this business from helping virtual assistants create these successful businesses to helping Thinkific customers and online course creators. I was super reluctant to call myself an expert and still am. Obsessive research and preparation, like obsessive. Every process mapped out, every mind map done. And I was definitely undercharging for many, many years, I think because of the imposter syndrome. And to be honest, even appearing on podcasts like this, you said to me at the beginning before we got on camera, how are you? And I said, I'm really nervous. My hands never sweat. I have super dry palms. They are sweaty right now. I have probably been preparing for this interview for about a week now. Don't ask me what I think you're actually going to throw at me that I wouldn't be able to answer, but there's that fear, right? And so people who have imposter syndrome are constantly over preparing. Downplaying my achievements. That was a big one for a long time. I don't do that so much anymore, but I think that's pretty common amongst people who have this imposter syndrome. And then post-interview anxiety. So I know when we are done this and I get the final recording, I am going to pick it apart and be insanely critical of it until I stop myself and say, you know what? It was great. How great you were on that podcast with Katie. What an amazing person she is. Look at how many people you were able to reach with this message. And so that's where some of my toolbox strategies will come in. But those are some specific examples. And again, that's just, a tiny, tiny amount. I think they happen every day.
Isn't it interesting? One thing that struck me as you were talking is kind of the variety of ways that it can show up from um, being hypercritical of yourself to wanting to be mindful of, like, do I fit the label of expert?
Yeah.
Should I use it appropriately or not? I think it's really fascinating, and I wonder sometimes how much of that is like culturally ingrained versus personal too. Like how much of that
Yeah,
is coming from you being a woman, or whatever else might be in your background
yeah,
that's causing you to feel that way or feel like you can't feel a certain way. Like, who is she to say she's an expert?
absolutely. Yeah. And I think all of those things are combined, which is why it's kind of a challenging thing. But everyone knows what that feeling is, that imposter syndrome feeling. Everyone knows I mean, most people know what that what that feels like. So regardless of how it manifests, it's going to manifest slightly different for everyone, but it can manifest in all of these different ways.
That's interesting. You say that. So my next question was going to be, what do you think are the main sources? And I think we maybe already identified some of them throughout the examples, like what's culturally ingrained. What messages might you have heard as a young person that just stuck for whatever reason? I'm
Yep,
curious if there's any others that you've been able to identify, like for yourself specifically.
lots. So most high achieving women that I know struggle with perfectionism. So there's this like internalized belief that we have to be flawless to be worthy, right? We can't have any flaws in order to be worthy. And if we could just achieve that, then we wouldn't feel like an imposter. I think that's a really common one, this perfectionism thing. And this is, I mean, it's a totally unrealistic standard. And it just leads to like this feeling that you're not quite, maybe it leads to it, or maybe it comes from this feeling like you're not quite good enough, regardless of what you've actually achieved. If I look back in my life, I tell people I should have been dead. I shouldn't be here or be thriving. I should be dead. That's the reality of my background. And I'm here. And if I look at my life, there's incongruency for me of like, how did I get here from where I came from? But anyways, this struggle with perfectionism. And then you've got the self-doubt and all of those. So that's one, I think. I think number two is we live in an age where comparison culture, we compare ourselves constantly because you can't not. It was bad when I was a teenager and we were looking at like teen magazine and we compared ourselves to that. But that was when you picked up the magazine. Other than that, it really wasn't in front of your face. Now it's everywhere, right? Now we compare ourselves to everyone, from the way we look to the way we feel or we're supposed to feel, to the kind of relationship we have or we don't have or we're supposed to have, to the kind of business, to what that business looks like. All of it, it's this, comparison culture, I call it, and it's just amplified by social media. And so it's really easy to fall into that trap of looking at someone and going, I should be there. But you have to remember that that's their A role and this is your B role. You're not there yet, right? And even if you were, you're two totally different people. Why are we comparing ourselves? And yet we do it, right? It's this constant exposure to this fraudulent success that we see all over social media. Because no one's posting about them crying on the floor in their bathroom because their boyfriend walked out the door, right?
Right.
No one's posting that. I wasn't posting at 2 a.m. last night when I had bags down to here and I'm exhausted sitting at my computer trying to get through my emails. Those aren't the things that people post. They post the smiles and the good and the travel and the look at me and isn't my life wonderful? And how can we not compare ourselves to that? So that's a second one. I think early experiences play a crucial role. So in an environment where praise was scarce and mistakes were criticized heavily, you're going to have this persistent feeling of inadequacy. It's certainly something I've dealt with my whole life. Never feeling like you're quite good enough, right? No matter what you've done, no matter what you've achieved, no matter what kind of relationships you have, it doesn't matter. You still have this. So I think a lot of it some of it anyway, stems from childhood for sure. And I think the other thing is there's this thing in a lot of cultures where women are supposed to be modest and downplay their achievements and avoid appearing bossy or aggressive, right? Um, that's torture for a woman who is self-assured because you can't speak up about the fact that you're self-assured. because you're looked at in a certain way. You're labeled as a certain thing. So there's that. There's also this immense pressure to excel in every area of life for women. So we're all supposed to be super women. Like we have this complex, a superwoman complex, right? We're supposed to be a great mom, be a great wife, be a great sister, be a great business owner, be a great this. We weren't meant to be doing all of these things all at once. And it's a impossible standard that we're trying to live up to. And let me just, I've got one more for you, Katie. I know this went on a really long time, but this is one more. And that I think, particularly for entrepreneurs, is this constant need to keep up with technology. So this perpetual learning curve that we are on even makes professionals feel like novices. So I work with 40 different software companies, okay? In my day-to-day business, they are constantly changing their platforms. They're constantly changing their terms. They're constantly changing their interfaces. I've been doing this for 23 years. And there are days when I go, oh my God, I'm starting from scratch with this now, you know? So I think put the average person who doesn't work kind of in this tech industry into that, and you're going to feel like a child all the time because it's constant big learning curve that you're on. And that can lead to self-doubt too.
Interesting. As you were listing all these things, I think that my audience can relate to every one of them because they're all high achievers. The perfectionism, the
Yeah.
comparison, the
Yeah.
drive to be perfect, the constantly keeping up with whatever's changing so that you're on top of things and not being perceived as being left behind or not being on top of things just for the sake of it. And
Yeah.
why? And just
And
look what it
why?
does to us.
Yeah. Look what it does to us. Look at what an anxious world we're living in. Look at how people are feeling about their lives. I mean, it's not working. It's
Mhm.
not working.
Agreed. Yeah. So what do we do to fix it? That's why we're here. How
That's
do
a
we
big
get through it?
conversation. Yeah. Yeah.
How do we get through it?
I've got some
So,
suggestions when we get there.
well,
Yeah.
how how do you see imposter syndrome showing up differently for people who live in the entrepreneurial world, which you do and I do, and I think a lot of my audience does, versus people in their personal lives?
Yeah, I think it shows up differently, but just as pervasive. So in the entrepreneurial world, this imposter syndrome often shows up as a reluctance to own your own expertise. So I have seen brilliant, brilliant people, and it's mostly women, refuse to raise their prices, pitch to a certain client, get up on stage and speak in front of an audience because they don't feel qualified enough. Yet they're extremely accomplished and extraordinarily qualified, right? So there's this confident, this constant pressure to feel confident and knowledgeable. And when you don't really necessarily feel like that, then that kind of amplifies this imposter syndrome for entrepreneurs, right? Another common manifestation is the over preparedness. So if they don't go above and beyond and work themselves to the bone, they will be exposed as fraud.
Mhm.
There's this fear that that's going to happen. So in personal life, though, it tends to be more subtle. So this could be difficulty accepting compliments, downplaying personal achievements, someone saying, oh, I just got lucky, or it wasn't that big of a deal, kind of brushing off their stuff, which you hear a lot of women do. I've seen clients struggle with not feeling good enough for their partners or feeling somehow like they're fooling their friends. And the interesting thing is, when this mask, this high achieving entrepreneurial, female boss bitch thing falls away when they come home, that's when you see a lot of this happen, right? And I think like there's some high stakes in entrepreneurship. We talked about that recently on an interview I did with you, this high stakes of this risky business of entrepreneurship. And so that I think can amplify imposter syndrome in business settings, but in personal settings, I think it manifests as more like a chronic low level dissatisfaction or insecurity. So I think they
Mhm.
manifest differently in personal and entrepreneurial life. but there's always crossover. We can't separate these two.
No, no. And you said something too that kind of triggered me to think, what is the why behind this? So, if I pretend I'm an expert and people realize I'm not, well, then what? Okay, like that in and of itself, whatever. But then what are the potential consequences to you? And what is it that is really driving that fear? Is it like this primitive fear that we're supposed to live in groups and we'll be ostracized from the group if we are discovered as being frauds?
Right? Probably that's part of it. I think ultimately it's this disconnect between external success and internal self-perception. So there's this disconnect between how we actually feel and perceive ourselves to be and the external successes that we know we've had and that are tangible and can be seen. We've written a book, we've spoken on stage, we've have students in a course, we work with clients as a coach, whatever it is, there's a disconnect there. And until you make that connection, which I think is a practice of many, many things, I think imposter syndrome is going to be a real thing in your life.
Agreed. As you were talking about that, I thought about, so I have an HR background, and there's data around the fact that men will apply for a job even if they don't meet the minimum qualifications of a job, but a woman's going to wait until she can tick every box before she bothers to submit her application because they want to make sure they are absolutely fully qualified for a job before they'll even throw their hat in the ring. And I just think of how many situations I've seen where you don't have enough applicants. And sometimes you're stunned, like, how did this person even get this job? Well, they raised their hand, like they
Yeah,
submitted their
yeah.
application. So how much are you missing out on by not being willing to just try when you feel like, oh, I don't have that one little thing, when probably
I
half
think
the
like
other
anything,
applicants are just like, I'll just throw my app in. I'll just put it in. It'll be great.
yeah. And so some of it is about self-confidence, some of it is about self-assuredness. I think again, there's so many factors that go into it. But I think this is where strategies come in. Like this doesn't have to be a lifelong thing. Do I feel imposter syndrome sometimes? For sure I do. Can I pretty quickly move beyond it now? Absolutely. Because of the strategies that I use to move through it.
So tell us about that then. Can you give some examples of times where you've maybe had imposter syndrome show up for you and maybe even threaten to stop you from what you've been wanting to do or trying to do, and then the strategies you use to get through it?
Yeah, I think that is the threat that it's going to stop you. No matter what situation you're in, imposter syndrome threatens to stop you from full expression of your life and yourself. So first of all, I have immense faith in the universe. So I trust that I am on the right path at all times, regardless if I'm perceiving it as hard or easy. I know it's the right path that I'm supposed to be on. And so being able to know that is helpful just as a starting place for this. But let me go through some of my strategies that I consciously use in many situations, but this one for sure. Number one, I think you have to label it as what it is, which is imposter syndrome. It's not the reality. It is a perception that you're having it. So I think just knowing that, first of all, like, oh, wow, yeah, this is imposter syndrome showing up for me now. That's like the first thing. You got to acknowledge that it's existing in your perception and also
Recognition is the
recognize,
first step.
yeah, and that it's not real. This is not real. This is just a perception that I'm having right now, right? Number two is grounding. I think this is hugely beneficial for so many reasons, but walking outside in my bare feet, in a forest, on the beach, anywhere in nature, not on cement, it pulls me back to remembering who I am. So another term for this might be mindfulness, but it helps me get grounded again to be able to fall back into myself and get out of this external chaos of social media and comparison and thoughts, ruminating thoughts and all of those things, right? And along with this, I think would be creative visualization. So your brain does not know the difference between fantasy and reality. And so I use that to my advantage. I spend at least 10 to 15 minutes a day in creative visualization, meaning I close my eyes, sit still, absolute quiet, and I live my life as I want to be living my life in my mind. And I, honest to God, think that's one of the reasons I've been successful,
That's
is because
amazing.
I have practiced this since I was probably 16 or 17 years old. Creative visualization. It works every time. It's unbelievable. So I think those two, grounding and creative visualization, for me are like a good foundational piece. Number three, and this is very tangible. So I have a page on my website called Client Love. And when I'm feeling this imposter syndrome creeping in with work, which is usually where it creeps in, I go to this page and I read all of the testimonials from my clients. So it's like you were talking about when you get anxious, you know, something tangible. What can I see? What can I feel? What can I hear? What can I touch? Right? For me, that's it. I'm looking at these testimonials from real people who I have really helped, who would not be writing a testimonial if I hadn't delivered on what I said I was going to deliver on. And so for me, that's like a tangible, oh yeah, right. Okay. Yes, I am helping. I do know what I'm talking about. And it's like just a good reminder that I have a lot of experience. I've had thousands of clients and I actually do know what I'm doing.
I love that. I love hearing
Yeah.
that, and I would encourage people, so you might not have a business and be collecting testimonials for that purpose, but I am almost embarrassed to admit it out loud, but I have an accolades folder. I used to work
Yes.
with somebody who would, when she was having a tough day, she would literally snap her fingers and go, accolades, when something positive would come her way. So I started that early on. And when somebody would send me a kind email or send me a little, like, hey, thanks so much for helping me, I throw it in that folder. And when I'm
Yep.
having a tough time, I pull it out and I'm like, look at that. I'm doing all
Yep.
right.
It's
I
a
helped
great idea. I
somebody.
did that for years. I have some, it's called a kudos file. Kudos to you, Kim.
Oh,
And it's like, that was what I pulled out before I started had client testimonials. And I actually still have a kudos file, and it's more for like kind words, not so much work related necessarily, but more personal related. So I think that's a great thing to do. If you don't have testimonials and work is where you struggle, keep a file, keep a notepad, write it down, whatever you need to do. It's tangible evidence that you're good. You're okay.
mhm.
You know?
Kudos or accolades, and nobody has to know but you.
Yeah, but it's a great way to remind yourself at those moments. Okay, I have two more. Number four, embrace a growth mindset. So I'm a learner of heart, like a super nerd. I used to read the dictionary for fun. Okay. Super nerd. Yes. And I can totally embrace that. And I am so okay with that now. I hid that for a long time, but I'm okay with being a super nerd. But I'm also a problem solver. So I look at challenges as opportunities for growth. So this is what I would call a growth mindset. When I come up to an obstacle, whether it's feeling like an imposter or any other kind of obstacle, I look at the opportunity in that obstacle as opposed to fall into the victim role, or like I refuse to shrink anymore. I won't shrink anymore. So I have a set of core beliefs. And if that relationship does not line up with my core beliefs, I'm out. If that client does not line up with my core beliefs, I'm out. If that decision I'm about to make does not line up with my core beliefs, I'm out. So it helps me sort of, it's a bit of a compass for me, but it also, having this growth mindset in combination with those core beliefs means that I can approach a topic or a challenge and go, okay, what's in this for me? Why am I being hit with this? Where am I supposed to go with this? Am I supposed to tackle this? Am I supposed to walk away? And so everything I look at as an opportunity for growth. And I think that's been really, really important in my life. Okay, last one. So a lady named Susan Jeffers wrote a book, I think it was in the 90s, called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways. And I read it when it was first published, and I have embraced that mantra since. So I know that growth is on the other side of uncomfortability. That's a tough one to stomach. But knowing that helps me face those challenges like imposter syndrome, right? I am absolutely terrified to speak on stage, but I have. This podcast definitely makes me uncomfortable, but I'm doing it anyways. So this feel the fear and do it anyways, I have really embraced as my mantra for my life. I don't let things scare me. I'm going to take it on. If I want to take it on, I'm going all in and I'm going to take it on.
I love that. So, such an important reminder, especially for people with anxiety, because fear is just your natural state on a day-to-day basis. So, I think
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to recognize. And so, like you mentioned earlier, recognizing, naming it, and just doing it anyway. This might be
Mhm.
scaring me, but I can do it anyway.
Yeah. That's just constant self-talk, right? Yep. This is a
Right.
little bit scary. And yes, there's going to be growth on the other side of it. And yes, you're still going to do this.
So, I have recognized imposter syndrome can cause you to not see the forest for the trees, so to speak. I think you lose the ability to think clearly, especially if you have anxiety. And one thing that's always amazed me about you is like you always see right to the heart of the matter on pretty much anything. There have been times in working with you where I'm like, oh my gosh, now I get what she was saying. She was right. And she saw it so much earlier than I did and more clearly than I did. So it's one of the reasons that I've loved learning from you. I'm wondering if you could share how you could or how you've kind of developed this seemingly magical way of cutting through the clutter and noise and getting to the core of any issue, which I think is part of just this whole conversation that we've been having about imposter syndrome and how it shows up for us.
Okay. I'm going to get a little woo woo on you here. So you
Love
probably
it.
guessed I'm deeply spiritual. That my belief in the universe and my path has gotten me through every single challenge in my life. So I am deeply, deeply spiritual. But I am also an intuitive and a medium. And I have been for a long time, and I didn't talk about it for a long time. So when I have conversations with others, and often if those others aren't even there, but I've had a conversation or I'm having an upcoming conversation with them, and this happens with clients, friends, it doesn't matter. There's no boundaries here. I get what I call downloads. And they are just, it is like, it's in the form of clarity for me. It's like I can, it's like I have a laser and I can see right through literally to your heart. So if I'm having a conversation, I can often not tell if you asked me what that person looked like that I had a conversation with, many times I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I could tell you exactly what was inside them. I feel
Wow.
like I talk to people's hearts instead of all of this fluff that we wear and that we feel. I know that sounds super woo-woo, but there's no other explanation for it. I speak to people's hearts. And so it's like my heart is talking to their heart, and it's crystal clear for me. Like it's so crystal clear for me, Katie. And I can't tell you that it comes from me. I just call them downloads. I get a message, it is delivered. Now, on the very tangible side of this, I have a lot of experience in this tech and marketing business. And so I have a lot of experience to draw from. So I know how to ask, I think, the right questions, and I can extract from what the client is saying, because it's very rare that they are saying what is actually going on, either what they're really feeling or what's really happening. It is very rare that that is what comes out of their mouth. And I just know what they're saying. Like, even if they didn't use the words, I would know what they were saying. I can't explain it more than that. I just have a knowing and a clarity when I speak to people about what the root issue or the root cause is.
It's like super discernment. You have the gift of discernment
Yeah,
and it's very
yeah.
clear.
It's so clear, Katie. It's so crystal clear.
And
Yeah,
I have seen that personally, like in my work with you. It's amazing.
it's a gift. I totally embrace it as a gift now. I don't know how to explain it. I just know that it exists. And I hear it from clients and friends and people all the time. And I just know it's real because I experience it.
That's amazing. And it's great that you get to share your gift with the world too.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I love it.
So, what would be your top 3 pieces of advice, especially for
Mhm.
high achievers with anxiety, when it comes to struggling with imposter syndrome?
Yep. So I would say number one, keep a kudos file or an accolades file
Mhm.
or a client love page. And when you're having those moments, go back to what other people have said about you to as evidence that this is not reality. This is just perception. Those kind of tie in together. Because my first one is sort of recognize that this is common, it's not reality, and it doesn't reflect your true abilities. And if you need evidence of that, then you have a kudos file, a client love page, whatever that looks like for you as evidence. And then the third thing I think is focus on continued learning and growth rather than perfection. This idea of perfection that we have is so toxic. I mean,
Mhm.
first of all, who's to say what perfect looks like? Who's
Right.
who's gonna set that criteria, right? We put these crazy standards on ourselves that it's impossible to meet. It's impossible to
Mhm.
do all those things, be all those things, have all of those achievements and still be sane. I just don't think it's possible. So I wrote this down. Remember that this is your life and you get to choose whether to shrink because of the fear of what other people might think or whether to grow into your full self-expression despite what other people think.
Oh, I love that.
And I think that sums it up for me. And when I said I refuse to shrink anymore because it makes other people feel uncomfortable, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because I'm living in my full self-expression.
I aspire to be you one day. That's amazing.
Oh, don't, Katie, don't.
That's amazing. Oh, Kim, you're such a gem. I appreciate you more than I can tell you. If my listeners would like to connect with you or learn more about working with you, where can they
Yeah.
find you?
Yeah. So I have a website. If you type Brainy Girl into Google, you will find it. It's Brainy Girl U, like the letter U.com. I've got lots of free resources, blogs, YouTube channel that's got lots of free resources on it. And everything you are probably going to need to find is there.
Perfect. And I'll put the link to all those in the show notes too so that people can find them easily.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Katie, you are such a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting
Oh,
me on your podcast.
thank you. Appreciate you, Kim. Hey, friend, thanks for being here. Did today's episode help you feel more in control of your anxiety? Did it inspire you to rest or relax? Or maybe it challenged you to really look at why anxiety is a part of your life? If so, I'd love to hear from you. If you would take 30 seconds, pause this episode, scroll down in Apple Podcasts, and leave me a review, I would be so grateful. See you next week. Disclaimer, I am not a medical professional and this podcast is not providing therapy or medical treatment. Contents of the podcast are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult your healthcare provider with your health questions and concerns.